The finish line stretched ahead like a mirage through the October morning mist, and Logan Martinez could hear nothing but his own thundering heartbeat drowning out the roar of 3,000 spectators packed into Riverside Park. His legs felt like concrete pillars, each step sending shockwaves through his 230-pound frame. But somehow he was still moving, still pushing forward with the state championship medal just 50 yards away. The kid they'd called Thunder Thighs and Bulldozer was about to cross that line in first place. Ahead of the lanky gazelles who'd been running since middle school. Ahead of the scholarship-bound seniors who'd never given him a second glance. In the hallways of Oakwood High. Behind him, he could hear the desperate footsteps of Marcus Chen from Valley Prep. The defending state champion whose college recruiters were somewhere in that crowd, probably already reaching for their phones to call other prospects. The morning sun broke through the clouds, just as Logan's coach, Mrs. Peterson, screamed his name from the sidelines, her voice cracking with the kind of emotion that comes from watching the impossible unfold before your eyes. This was supposed to be Marcus's race. Everyone knew it. The newspapers had written it. The betting websites had locked it in. And Logan's own teammates had whispered about it in the locker room just hours before. 6 months ago, Logan Martinez had been the fat kid who got picked last for everything. The one who ate lunch alone in the library to avoid the cafeteria's cruel whispers. The son of a single mother who worked double shifts at the diner just to keep their lights on. Now, as his lungs burned and his vision blurred, he was 10 steps away from rewriting every story anyone had ever told about him, including the one he'd been telling himself. The journey to this moment had been carved out of pain, doubt, and 1,000 small victories that nobody had bothered to notice. But today was different. Today, Logan Martinez was about to show everyone that sometimes the biggest heart comes in the most unexpected package. Asterisk. Hello my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Asterisk. Oakwood, Texas. Wasn't the kind of place where dreams came true, was the kind of place where they came to die slow, quiet deaths. Population 8,847, nestled between endless stretches of cotton fields and the interstate that carried everyone's kids away to college, never to return. The town's claim to fame was a Dairy Queen that had been serving the same menu since 1987 and a high school football team that hadn't won a district championship in over a decade. Logan Martinez knew every crack in the sidewalk between his house and school, every shortcut through the neighborhoods where the houses got smaller and the lawns got browner. The closer you got to the railroad tracks, his mama, Elena Martinez, had been working at Rosie's Diner since before Logan was born, pulling double shifts that left her hands permanently stained with coffee and her back permanently curved from carrying heavy trays. She'd come to Oakwood from El Paso with dreams of nursing school. But life had other plans, specifically Logan's daddy, who'd disappeared faster than morning dew when the pregnancy test came back positive. Mijo, she'd tell Logan every morning, as she pinned her hair back for another 16-hour shift, we got each other, and that's more than some folks got. She'd kiss his forehead, her lips always tasting like the industrial-strength hand soap from the diner. And Logan would watch her walk to work, her uniform already wrinkled before the day even started. At 15, Logan carried 230 pounds on his 5'10" frame like a badge of shame. His body a constant reminder of the genetics his daddy had left behind and the stress-eating habits that had developed somewhere between middle school and the realization that he was different from the other kids. The bullying had started in elementary school with innocent-sounding nicknames, Big Guy, Champ, Bulldozer, but had evolved into something meaner by high school, something that cut deeper than the surface. Marcus Williams, the quarterback's younger brother, had made it his personal mission to remind Logan daily that he was built like a refrigerator and moved like molasses in January. Cross-country running in Oakwood was like everything else in town an afterthought, a sport. For the kids who couldn't make the football team or weren't tall enough for basketball, the team practiced on the same track, where the football players ran their conditioning drills, using the same equipment that had been donated by the Booster Club back when Logan was still learning to walk. Mrs. Peterson, the English teacher who'd inherited the coaching job because nobody else wanted it, had been trying to rebuild the program for 3 years with a budget that wouldn't cover a decent pair of running shoes for each kid. It was a Tuesday in early August when Logan's world shifted on its axis, though he didn't know it at the time. He'd been walking home from summer school making up the pay credit he'd failed because he couldn't run a mile in under 12 minutes. When he heard Mrs. Peterson calling his name from the school parking lot. Logan Martinez. Hold up there, young man. She was standing beside her beat-up Honda Civic, sweat stains marking her shirt from the afternoon heat, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of desperate expression that teachers got when they were trying to save the world, one kid at a time. Son, I got a proposition for you, she said, her East Texas drawl making everything sound like a question. I need bodies for the cross-country team. I don't care if you've never run a mile without stopping. I don't care if you think you're too big, or too slow, or too whatever. I need 15 kids to make this program work, and right now, I got 12. She looked at him with a kind of intensity that made Logan uncomfortable, like she was seeing something in him that he'd never seen himself. You show up to practice tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., and I'll show you what you're really made of. The idea was absurd, laughable even. Logan Martinez, the kid who got winded walking up the stairs to his second-floor English class, joining a running team. But something in Mrs. Peterson's voice, something in the way she'd said what you're really made of, had planted a seed in his mind that he couldn't shake. That night, lying in bed, listening to his mama's footsteps as she got ready for another closing shift at the diner, Logan stared at the ceiling and wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than the reflection he saw in the mirror. Every morning, the first practice was a disaster, wrapped in humidity and seasoned with humiliation. Logan showed up at 5:58 a.m. wearing basketball shorts from Walmart and sneakers that had been purchased more for their price tag than their performance. His stomach already churning with a mixture of anxiety and the gas station breakfast burrito he'd wolfed down on the way to school. The other runners looked like they'd been carved from different claylene. Efficient machines with legs that seemed to go on forever and lungs that processed oxygen like high-performance engines. Logan felt like a pickup truck trying to keep up with race cars. All right, y'all, we're gonna start easy, Mrs. Peterson announced, her voice carrying across the parking lot where the team had assembled. 2-mile loop around the neighborhood, nice and comfortable. This ain't about speed today, it's about finishing. She looked directly at Logan when she said it, and he knew she was throwing him a lifeline disguised as encouragement. The other kids exchanged glances, smirking. Others genuinely curious about why the big kid from their English class was suddenly trying to be a runner. The first mile was pure torture. Logan's lungs felt like they were filling with concrete. His legs screamed for mercy, and sweat poured down his face like he was melting from the inside out. Marcus Chen, a junior who'd transferred from Austin with a reputation for being the real deal, lapped him twice before Logan had even reached the halfway point. You got this, big man, Marcus called out as he passed, and Logan couldn't tell if it was genuine encouragement or polite condescension. Either way, it stung. But something magical happened at mile 1.3. Logan's body, which had been fighting him every step of the way, suddenly found a rhythm. His breathing evened out, his steps became more measured, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was floating instead of pounding the pavement. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before his legs turned back to jelly, but those 30 seconds were enough to show him what was possible. He finished the 2-mile loop in 18 minutes and 47 seconds dead last, but he finished. Not bad for a first day, Mrs. Peterson said as Logan collapsed on the grass beside the track, his chest heaving like a bellows. You know what I saw out there? I saw a kid who didn't quit. That's worth more than speed, Logan. Speed you can teach, but heart that's something you're born with. She handed him a water bottle and a towel, then sat down beside him on the grass. My daddy always told me that the strongest steel gets forged in the hottest fire. Right now, you're in the furnace, son. Question is, you gonna let it burn you up or make you stronger? The transformation didn't happen overnight. For the first month, Logan was the team's charity case. The project that Mrs. Peterson had taken on to prove some point about perseverance and human potential. He lost 15 pounds in those first 4 weeks, his body slowly adapting to the daily punishment of 5-mile runs and track workouts that left him lying on his bedroom floor at night, too exhausted to even think about the taunts from kids at school. His mama noticed the change first, the way he stood a little straighter. The way he actually looked forward to getting up at 5:30 a.m. instead of dreading each new day. The breakthrough came during a time trial in mid-September. Mrs. Peterson had the team running a 5,000 to establish baseline times for the season, and Logan had been preparing for another last-place finish when something clicked. Maybe it was the cooler weather. Maybe it was the 2 months of conditioning finally paying off, but suddenly Logan was passing people. Not just struggling runners, actual competitors who'd been looking past him all season. He finished in 1947, 5th on the team, and the shocked silence from his teammates was worth more than any trophy he'd ever imagined winning. Where the hell did that come from? Marcus Chen asked afterward, his voice carrying a new note of respect. I've been running since I was 12, and you just cut 3 minutes off your time like it was nothing. Logan couldn't explain it. Couldn't put into words the feeling of his body finally cooperating with his will, but he knew something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just the fat kid trying to be a runner anymore, he was a runner who happened to be carrying extra weight, and there was a world of difference between those two things. Asterisk. October in East Texas brought crisp mornings and the kind of weather that made running feel like flying. But it also brought the pressure of district championships and the reality that Logan's newfound success was about to be tested against the best runners in the region. The local newspaper had picked up the story of the unlikely runner from Oakwood High, and suddenly Logan found himself dealing with attention he'd never wanted and expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. The headline read, "From last to first. Local students' amazing transformation," and it made him feel like a circus act rather than an athlete. The academic pressure was crushing. Logan had always been a decent student, B's and C's with the occasional A in English, but now he was trying to balance AP classes with 2-a-day practices and the constant fatigue that came with pushing his body to its limits. His mama had made it clear that running was fine as long as his grades didn't suffer, and with college applications looming, every quiz and test felt like it carried the weight of his future. He'd fall asleep over his chemistry homework, wake up at 5:34, morning practice, then struggle to stay awake during first period, while his classmates whispered about his latest race results. The social dynamics at school had shifted in ways that made Logan uncomfortable. Girls who'd never spoken to him before suddenly wanted to sit at his lunch table, asking about his secret and whether he was seeing anyone. Meanwhile, some of the football players had started calling him Marathon Man with a mixture of respect and resentment, as if his success somehow diminished their own athletic achievements. Marcus Williams, his old tormentor, had gone from calling him Bulldozer to ignoring him completely, which was somehow worse than the bullying. The physical challenges were relentless. Logan's knees had started aching after long runs. His shins felt like they were splitting apart, and Mrs. Peterson had to constantly remind him about proper nutrition and hydration. "You're still carrying more weight than these other boys," she'd explained during their weekly one-on-one meetings, "which means your body's working harder to do the same job. That's not an excuse, that's just physics. We gotta be smarter about recovery and preparation." She'd started giving him ice baths after hard workouts and had convinced the school nurse to tape his shins before races. The regional meet in mid-October was Logan's first real test against runners from the big city schools. Kids who'd been training year-round with private coaches and nutritionists. Valley Prep's Marcus Chen was there. along with runners from Dallas and Houston who looked like they'd been built in a laboratory specifically for cross-country. Logan had never felt smaller or more out of place than he did standing at the starting line, surrounded by gazelles while feeling like a buffalo trying to join a herd of deer. The race started fast for Logan's comfort, and for the first mile, he found himself in the back third of the pack, watching the leaders disappear into the distance. His lungs burned, his legs felt heavy, and for a moment, he wondered if he'd been fooling himself about his abilities. But then he remembered Mrs. Peterson's words about forged steel and hot fires, and he started picking off runners one by one. By mile 2, he was in the top 20. By mile 3, he was in the top 10, and the crowd was starting to notice the big kid from Oakwood, who was running like his life depended on it. The final stretch was a blur of pain and determination. Logan could see Marcus Chen about 50 yards ahead, looking smooth and effortless, but he could also see that Marcus was starting to labor. Logan's legs felt like lead, but his heart was pumping pure adrenaline. And somewhere in the deepest part of his being, he found another gear. He passed 3 runners in the final 400 meters, finished 6th overall, and qualified for the state championships. As he crossed the line, legs buckling and vision blurring, he heard Mrs. Peterson screaming his name like he'd just won the lottery. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, during what should have been an easy recovery run, Logan collapsed. On the track, his vision went black, his legs gave out, and he woke up in the school nurse's office with Mrs. Peterson holding his hand and his mama crying softly in the corner. The doctor said it was exhaustion combined with dehydration, but Logan knew it was something deeper. His body had been writing checks that his recovery couldn't cash, and the bill had finally come due. Asterisk, the week of forced rest that followed. Logan's collapse was the longest week of his life. Mrs. Peterson had banned him from practice. His mama had hidden his running shoes. And the team doctor had given him a lecture about pushing too hard too fast that left him feeling like a reckless child rather than a serious athlete. He spent his afternoons sitting on the bleachers, watching his teammates run the workouts he should have been doing, feeling his fitness slip away with each passing day while the state championship loomed just 2 weeks away. It was during one of these enforced rest periods that Logan had a conversation with his mama that changed everything. She'd come home from her morning shift at the diner, found him moping on the couch, and sat down beside him with the kind of determined expression that meant she was about to drop some serious truth. "Mijo," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 16 years of single motherhood, "you think I don't know what it's like to feel like you're not enough? You think I don't know what it's like to have people look at you and see only what you're not?" She told him about the dreams she'd had before he was born, about the nursing school acceptance letter that had arrived 3 days after she'd found out she was pregnant, about the choice she'd made to put her own ambitions on hold so he could have a chance at something better. "I watch you run, and I see myself at 18, believing that I had to be perfect to be worthy of success. But baby, you don't have to prove nothing to nobody. You already proved everything you need to prove just by showing up every day, by not quitting when it got hard, by being brave enough to try something that scared you." The revelation hit Logan like a physical blow. He'd been running for everyone else's approval, to prove the bullies wrong, to make Mrs. Peterson proud, to live up to the newspaper headlines and the expectations of people who'd never believed in him before. But he'd never been running for himself. Never been running because he loved the feeling of his feet hitting the pavement, or the rush of endorphins that came after a hard workout. He'd been running to become someone else, instead of becoming the best version of himself. That night, Logan did something he hadn't done since he was a little kid. He snuck out of the house, not to party or meet friends, but to run. He laced up his shoes and headed out into the October darkness. With no watch, no route planned, no goals except to remember why he'd fallen in love with running in the first place. He ran through the quiet streets of Oakwood, past the diner where his mama would be working the late shift, past the houses where his classmates were probably doing homework or playing video games, past the cemetery where his grandparents were buried. For the first time in months, Logan ran slowly. He ran at a pace that let him think, that let him feel the rhythm of his breathing and the steady beat of his heart. He ran through the neighborhoods where he'd grown up. Remembering the kid he'd been before, he'd become the runner everyone was talking about. That kid had been scared and lonely and uncertain about his place in the world. But he'd also been real in a way that Logan had forgotten how to be. When he finally returned home, his mama was waiting on the porch, her face a mixture of anger and relief. "Where you've been, boy?" I was about to call the police, but when she saw his face calm for the first time in weeks, she softened. "You figure something out?" she asked, and Logan nodded, not trusting his voice to explain the shift that had occurred somewhere between mile 3 and mile 4 of his midnight run. The next day, Logan walked into Mrs. Peterson's office and told her he was ready to come back to practice, but on his terms. He wanted to run because he loved it, not because he had to prove anything to anyone. He wanted to race at state because he'd earned his spot, not because he was trying to be someone else's idea of an inspirational story. Mrs. Peterson looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that meant she understood exactly what he was trying to tell her. "You know what, Logan?" she said, leaning back in her chair. "I think you just figured out the difference between running away from something and running toward something. And that, young man, is going to make all the difference in the world." The morning of the state championship dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn weather that made Texas feel like a different planet entirely. Riverside Park in Austin was already buzzing with activity by 7 a.m. teams warming up, parents claiming prime spots along the course, and coaches walking the route one final time, pointing out strategic locations to their athletes. Logan had slept surprisingly well, his body and mind finally in sync after weeks of preparation that had felt more like meditation than training. Mrs. Peterson had driven the team down to Austin in the school's ancient bus, and Logan had spent the 3-hour trip listening to music and watching the landscape change from the flat cotton fields of East Texas to the rolling hills of the capital city. His mama had taken the day off from the diner the first time she'd missed work in over 2 years, and Logan could see her in the stands, wearing the Go Logan t-shirt that the cross-country team parents had made for her. The competition was fierce. 350 of the best runners in Texas were gathered in one place, including Marcus Chen from Valley Prep, who'd been featured on the cover of Texas Runner magazine the month before. The pre-race favorites were mostly kids from the big suburban schools, athletes who'd been running competitively since middle school and whose parents could afford private coaches and altitude training camps. Logan was seeded 15th, which Mrs. Peterson kept reminding him was exactly where we want to be, close enough to make a move, far enough back to surprise some folks. As the runners gathered at the starting line, Logan felt a familiar calm settling over him. This was different from the nervous energy he'd felt at regionals, different from the desperate hunger that had driven him through the early part of the season. He was here because he belonged here, because he'd earned his spot through months of 5:30 a.m. practices and ice baths and shin splints and small victories that had built into something bigger than he'd ever imagined possible. The gun fired, and 350 runners surged forward like a human wave. Logan let himself get carried along with the pack, resisting the urge to go out too fast, trusting the racing strategy that he and Mrs. Peterson had developed over the previous weeks. The first mile was about positioning, the second mile was about moving up, and the third mile was about finding out what he was really made of. For the first time in his running career, Logan felt like he had a plan instead of just hope. The course at Riverside Park was notorious for its hills rolling terrain that separated the pretenders from the contenders, with a particularly brutal climb at mile 2.5 that had broken many a runner's spirit over the years. Logan had studied video of the course, had visualized every turn and elevation change, and when they hit the first major hill at mile 1.8, he was ready. While other runners started to struggle, Logan found his rhythm, his powerful stride eating up the incline as he passed runner after runner who'd gone out too fast in the early going. By mile 2, Logan was in 8th place and feeling strong, He could see Marcus Chen up ahead, running in his typical smooth style, but he could also see that Marcus was working harder than usual, his form beginning to break down under the pressure of trying to maintain his early pace. Logan's coach had always told him that his size was an advantage on hills and in the late stages of races, when other runners started to fade and his power became the deciding factor. The final mile was a blur of controlled violence. Logan's legs were screaming. His lungs felt like they were on fire, and every step required a conscious decision to keep moving forward. But somewhere deep in his core, he found a reserve of strength that he didn't know existed. He passed fourth place, then third, then second. And suddenly, he was running stride for stride with Marcus Chen, the two of them pulling away from the field as the finish line came into view. The crowd was on its feet. The noise was deafening, and Logan could hear Mrs. Peterson's voice cutting through the chaos. "This is it, Logan. This is your moment." With 200 meters to go, Logan made his move. He didn't outkick Marcus, he outpowered him, using every ounce of strength he'd built up over months of training to simply run away from the field. As he crossed the finish line, arms raised in disbelief, he could see his mama in the stands, tears streaming down her face. And he knew that everything, all the pain, all the doubt, all the early mornings and late nights, had been worth it. The medal ceremony felt like a dream. Logan stood on the top step of the podium, the gold medal heavy around his neck, listening to the Star-Spangled Banner while camera flashes popped around him like fireworks. Mrs. Peterson was crying openly. His mama was taking pictures with a disposable camera she'd bought at the gas station, and his teammates were chanting his name from the stands. But what Logan remembered most was the moment of pure silence right before they announced his name as the state champion, the moment when he realized that he'd done something that would change his life forever. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of interviews and college recruiters and newspaper photographers who wanted to capture the feel-good story of the year. Logan handled it all with the same calm determination he'd brought to his training. But what mattered most to him were the quiet moments, the hug from his mama that lasted 5 full minutes, the text from Marcus Chen congratulating him on the race, the way Mrs. Peterson looked at him like he'd just handed her the moon on a silver platter. Within 2 weeks, Logan had received scholarship offers from 6 different universities, including Texas A&M and Rice University, schools that had seemed as unreachable as Mars just a year earlier. His mama cried again when they calculated how much money his running ability would save them. But Logan knew the real value wasn't financial, it was the knowledge that he'd taken control of his own story, that he'd refused to let other people's opinions define his limitations. The transformation went deeper than athletics. Logan carried himself differently now, spoke up more in class, and had developed the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing he could overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. He'd learned that the voice in his head, telling him he wasn't good enough, was just noise, and that the only opinion that really mattered was his own. The kid, who'd once hidden in the library during lunch, now ate in the cafeteria, surrounded by teammates and friends who saw him as he truly was. Looking back, Logan realized that the real victory hadn't been crossing the finish line first, it had been the moment he'd decided to show up to that first practice, overweight and out of shape and absolutely terrified of failing. Every step after that had been a choice, a decision to keep moving forward even when everything in his body and mind was telling him to quit. The state championship was just the reward for making that choice every single day for 7 months. As he walked across the stage at graduation 6 months later, Logan thought about all the kids who were sitting in their bedrooms right now, convinced that they weren't fast enough, or strong enough, or good enough to chase their dreams. He thought about the coaches like Mrs. Peterson who saw potential where others saw problems, and the parents, like his mama, who worked multiple jobs to give their children chances they'd never had themselves. And he thought about the simple truth that had carried him from the back of the pack to the front of the line. Sometimes the biggest victories come wrapped in the most unlikely packages, and sometimes the only person standing between you and your dreams is the voice in your head, telling you it's impossible. Asterisk, asterisk.